the young to middle-aged females are such an just drastically undertreated and undiagnosed like population.
Yeah, and they're still suffering. Like I feel sometimes like maybe they're even suffering worse because it seems like the men just grind the hell out of their teeth, but some of them are so tired and in pain and stuff, but not usually. They're not usually in pain.
Yeah. They're literally, the young to middle-aged females are my favorite population to treat because they have such severe symptoms. And with something pretty simple, they have such a drastic improvement of quality of life.
Yeah.
And yes, you're not going to like, our traditional way of looking at success of sleep disordered breathing is AHI, but like, that's not what we're fixing because they're already within normal. And so, yes, we're treating symptoms, but like the anecdotal aspect of, not anecdotal, but the subjective reports from all these people is unreal. Like their whole life has changed versus these women, they're compensating and they're struggling for so many years and decades. And then once they hit menopause, they don't have the ability to compensate as much. They're not clenching as much. They're not going through the compensatory patterns. And so that's when the incidence and severity of sleep apnea for females triples to quadruples is around menopause because you've lost that. And then we blame
progesterone protects the upper airway. Estrogen keeps the tissues elastic and strong. And without that, you're going to have a lot more airway collapse. And your like clenching and grinding isn't going to.
Yeah. And then those hormones are balanced out in the deep stage of sleep. And if you're not getting good quality deep sleep, then that's where all that goes downwards. And so I mean, a lot of the functional medicine doctors that I work with that do really that focus on women's health and that whole period of life, like if you're not sleeping well, like all their other stuff is not going to go very well too. And I think a lot of the hormone issues are blamed strictly on the hormones when there's actually a little bit more of an upstream issue, and it's the sleep caused by the breathing.
Yeah.
By the underdeveloped jawbone.
Right, because when their cortisol spikes, because they think they're going to die in their sleep, then their progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone are all going to drop.
Yeah.
Which is pretty significant. Like, I had a mom the other day being like, I'm just living on cortisol. And I was like, maybe we should sleep test you. Yeah. Okay, I have one for you that I think would be good to discuss. I had a patient yesterday who was like, I'm wearing this CPAP because they told me to, but I don't feel like it's helping at all. Like, I don't feel any different with it. And so I was like, let's sleep test you with it on and with it off. And it was interesting because they diagnosed his apnea based on a 3% drop. And then they tested whether his CPAP was working on a 4%. So he had like 15 events an hour at 3% and 2 at 4%. And it didn't look at anything else. So it was just like, and so when I tested him, it was totally unchanged. His apnea was exactly the same. His oxygen was the same. His heart rate was the same. Yeah, he was still getting up to 120 in his pulse. And the only thing that was different was he was getting shit for deep sleep, like 0 deep sleep, with the CPAP. And he was getting better deep sleep without it. And he was like, well, maybe those nights I maybe had a drink, so I don't know. But it was interesting because I was like, well, in my mind, I wasn't sure if he was a high-risk OSA patient or a low-risk OSA patient because he spent no time under 90, but his heart rate was getting up to 120 some nights. And I was like, there's a possibility that your CPAP could actually harm you. So if you're not feeling any benefit from it, you should definitely go back to your MD and like take him these tests and discuss it. But can you shed any light on that for me?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to go a little bit deeper because now that you bring this up, I totally forgot to talk about this. And I'm glad we are, because I actually have a pediatric sleep physician at my practice that I'm treating, and I reviewed her home sleep study yesterday, and she she did 4 nights in Colorado and then 3 nights in Massachusetts. And the 4 nights in Colorado, 2 of them were with CPAP and 2 of them were without. And all 4 nights, the AHI was pretty much the exact same number. The hypoxia was the exact same number. The only difference between those 4 nights, where on the 2 nights that she didn't wear CPAP, her wake transitions were like 7 and 9, whereas the nights she wore CPAP, her wake transitions were at 16 and 18. So it's
Make it make sense.
Yeah. And so I'm like talking to her about this. And then also I talked with her because she's a sleep physician. And so I'm like, hey, like, I also like, I'm talking a little bit more eloquently because I'm talking to a sleep physician when I'm reviewing the sleep study. I'm
You're
not
like,
so
don't want
much
to call
more
your
like,
whole career into question here.
but the, it's interesting as we talked about that because we even then went into, like you said, they could be hurting you. And I did go into the fact that like, hey, like we had a cardiologist talk about like how this is increasing the vascular inflammation and drastically increasing all cardiovascular disease. And she's like, yeah, actually we've been seeing a lot about it, but it's kind of, it just hasn't been put into practice, but it's been around the sleep medicine. We've been talking about this for a while. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because the reason why this got brought up is because those next 3 nights she went to Massachusetts, the AHI went from AHI of 3%, went from like the 17 and 19 episodes an hour down to like 2 to 3 episodes an hour. Immediately when she went to Massachusetts.
Just to be at lower elevation.
Correct. So that's the equivalent, especially when we're living at 7,000 feet in Colorado Springs. Like if you just do an oxygen concentrator, and that's what that's simulating is you live at this high elevation, but you're going to sleep in Massachusetts. And then all of the like hypopneas are completely gone and your AHI is normal. And we're not forcing you down the throat. We're just taking all the air from around you and concentrating it into your nose. And that's why, I mean, like, and I even told her, I have another sleep physician that I work with, and he's willing to give all my patients oxygen concentrators and prescribe that over CPAP. And we've gotten all of our patients off of CPAP. Some might need oxygen concentration, but that's even what that cardiologist was talking about at the American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine conference that we were at. He's like, whatever we can do, he goes, I would much rather have a little bit higher AHI not using CPAP because of what's going to do to the cardiovascular system. And that's a cardiologist that's saying that to us, right? And so the CPAP, like, they don't do a lot of titration sleep studies with the CPAP anymore either. Usually what they would do is they do the sleep study with the CPAP, or they do a initial sleep study, an initial polysomnography, an in-lab sleep study with nothing. Sometimes they would make a split night study where they give you a CPAP halfway through the night because you're so bad, or they just make you go through the entire night. Then they give you the CPAP, and then you have you come back, and then you do a sleep study with the CPAP on, and then in-lab study for another sleep study. And so that's then, okay, that's how they determine which pressures they're going to use for you. Then in about 5 years, you come back to the sleep center and you do another sleep study to see how well the CPAP is still being effective and if it's still effective. And that's where Cleet Kushida, the chief medical officer of Stanford Sleep Medicine Center, I asked him this during like COVID, during a webinar, and he said about 87% of his patients were having to increase their pressures at the 5-year mark for their CPAP, which that means they're getting worse with the CPAP. It's not obviously making anything better. It's only getting worse, which makes sense. You have lazier breathing. This mask is blowing air down your throat. But nonetheless, they don't do as much of those 5-year CPAP titration sleep studies anymore because the CPAP will determine your AHI on the machine.
Yeah, but
the AHI is an apnea-hypopnea index. So an apnea event is when you stop breathing. And yes, the CPAP should be able to determine when there's no more air getting passed. It's blocked. But how is it determining the hypopnea, which is a 3 or 4% drop in oxygen? It's literally an algorithm. And so I've done this so many times where I'll have them do the CPAP, and then I'll do a sleep study with the sleep image ring that actually is looking at oximetry and actually measuring hypopneas. And the CPAP will say 0.8 AHI. And then my sleep image ring will be anywhere from 23 to I've gotten somebody as high as 40 on the sleep image ring.
Whoa.
Compared to the CPAP saying that they're within normal limits, which is less than 5 episodes an hour. So because the CPAP, first off, like how it's using an algorithm to determine the hypopnea score. It's not actually measuring the oximetry where you have a 3 or 4% drop. So it's not that accurate. I mean, also, like I am in a higher elevation, so it probably takes less constriction of the airway. That's what the CPAP is probably measuring before that oxygen drops. but it's still not accurate. Even if you do that at sea level, it's still not going to be that accurate. And so,
it's so much more layered than that too. Like
yeah,
there's, I mean, to like, a reason I laughed is like to check someone after 5 years and all you do is check, did they stop? Is the air going through this tube? Like we are looking in so much more detail at like the quality of the REM sleep and the fragmentation and the periodicity and the heart rate and like what to just like look at that one number and be like, you're fine. We'll see you in 5 years. To me is like
malpractice.
I actually feel like it's really disrespectful to the patient. It's like, you're so dumb and fat that we don't think you could do anything better than this. It's like shocking to me that we would treat patients that way.
Yeah. Well, they don't look ever, like anyone's ever had an in-lab sleep study, they know that nothing has been reviewed with them. All they're told is get a phone call, you have sleep apnea, here's your CPAP. And that is the extent. They don't ever look at REM or deep sleep. And even like people that are like airway and sleep focused, we might look at the two of those two of airway of deep sleep and REM, but also we've talked about this, not all REM percentages are the same. Like somebody with 25% REM is going to still have complete different symptoms and have a different problem than somebody that also has 25% of REM. Because if you have 25% REM, but it's so chopped up and fragmented, you're still going to have all the REM-like symptom or the REM deficiency symptoms. You're not actually getting quality REM, even though you have a good amount of duration.
Yeah.
Versus if you can get 25% REM, but you have 4 long bands of it that are continuous where it's not being interrupted.
No one has that.
And
Everyone's
I mean,
like,
I've seen like a couple. Yeah. I've had a couple, we on our calls, I've shown a couple of those studies where I'm like, oh my gosh, that is beautiful REM. Like it's like a unicorn. And so when you see that, it's amazing. But that's the thing, is it's also not just the REM percentage. And so you look at your watch. I mean, people might look at the Oura ring and they see sleep disturbances and they see that still happening in REM. And then they're still going to have the brain fog and all the REM type symptoms.
Well, talk about depression and anxiety, because I had a patient ask me about that this week who was not getting any REM. And he was like, could this be linked to depression and anxiety?
And that's where, and even like traumatic events. So like Matthew Walker, he's the author of the book Why We Sleep. I love his book because it goes into like why we are trying to sleep, which is really what our ultimate goal at the end of the day is, optimizing someone's quality of life by optimizing their quality of sleep. And in order to do that, you have to be able to breathe, because if you can't breathe, you're not going to be able to get good quality sleep, which then that's not good. That's going to affect every cell in the brain and the body and affect your overall quality of life. And like that's the big picture that I think everybody loses sight of who's getting into this realm. But in REM stage sleep, it is the brain's restorative sleep. And in REM, it pretty much calms down the fear center part of your brain called the amygdala. Also in REM, it connects the prefrontal cortex to that amygdala. It kind of creates a connection between the two. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for the executive functioning of our brain. It's what makes us higher level animals than other animals. And that's why our teenagers don't have properly developed prefrontal cortex. I was going
to say 12-year-olds versus 25-year-olds.
Yeah. I mean, as a 25-year-old, it's still questionable for me, but so the REM sleep will do that. It calms down the amygdala and it connects the prefrontal cortex to it. Think of as like the amygdala as a puppy. And this is an analogy that's Matthew Walker used. The amygdala is a puppy. And think of it, when you get good quality REM, you just took that puppy on a 3-hour walk. And so it comes back home, lays down, and passes out. And then also with REM sleep, you're taking the prefrontal cortex and connecting like a leash to the amygdala. So literally with REM sleep, you're also getting the part of the brain that's responsible for executive function, and it's putting a regulating connection on that puppy. And so that's, you have like almost like the checks and balances that's happening to make sure that part of the brain can stay regulated. However, if you're not getting good quality REM, meaning even like not quantity, but quality REM, if you're getting nice, long, continuous REM sleep, that's how we're supposed to be, and you're dreaming every night and remembering those dreams, and it should not be any anxiety-based or fear-based. But if you don't have that type of REM sleep and you have inadequate duration or quality of REM, you just took that puppy and you gave it a bunch of sugar. And so now that amygdala is now running wild throughout the house like a bull in a china shop, and it's running rampant. And then you also just lost that leash connected to the puppy. So now without the proper amount of REM sleep, you've lost that connection from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. And so now you've lost that control as well. So that now amygdala, that is the fear center part of your brain, is going like ham throughout your brain. And now you have this overactive amygdala that will lead to a lot higher anxiety type symptoms and depressive type symptoms. And this REM sleep is also taking the edges off of traumatic events where you process through all of like negative things you've gone through. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Matthew Walker is it's not time heals all wounds, it's REM sleep heals all wounds. And most of us are not getting good quality REM sleep. A nice little way you can kind of get a rough estimate of you're getting good quality REM is I want you to dream every night and remember those dreams. And they cannot be anxiety based. They have to be weird, whatever, chill dreams. And majority of people I talk to, they're like, yeah, I'll dream, but I don't remember any of them. So, yeah. Anyways, but yes, 100%. If you're not getting good quality REM, that is definitely leading to a lot more of those anxiety and depressive type symptoms.
Mm-hmm. My sister's getting good REM then. All the time she's like, I had this dream and I think it means that.
We're gonna call her Martin Luther King.
She's very spiritual. She's got dreams that tell her things, but like, I feel like nobody has that. That's kind of rare.
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm. It is a question I ask most of my patients.
Yeah, we ask it too.
Yeah.
A lot of times kids will say they don't have dreams. And then the mom kind of starts to tear up. She's like, oh my God, I didn't realize this kid wasn't dreaming.
I think that's my favorite thing. Yeah, my kids woke up this morning and told me about their dreams, which is, really, I'm like, okay, great.
Check that box.
Yeah.